He didn't ignore her because he was rude. He ignored her because for the first time in 11 years, someone was saying something worth hearing. His mother had been talking for 40 minutes. Marco had not heard a single word. And the reason was standing 20 feet away holding a coffee pot, quietly telling a table of strangers that the cannoli had just come out of the oven and that it would change their entire week. She said it like she meant it, like food was a promise she personally intended to keep. Marco watched her and forgot that his mother was still speaking. If you think you know where this story goes, stay till the prompt end because you don't. The restaurant was called Sable. It sat on the edge of Rome's most expensive corridor. All dark marble and low lighting and the kind of quiet that money buys. His mother, Isabella Rossi, had chosen it deliberately. She always chose deliberately. She had flown in from Milan for this specific lunch at this specific table to deliver a specific message. Marco would marry Sofia Bianchi by the end of the year, or she would restructure the Rossi Group's board and remove him from the seat his father had built. Not a suggestion. A timetable. Marco had listened to the first 3 minutes, asked for water, and then noticed the waitress at the corner table. Her name tag said Chiara. She was tall, dark-skinned, with natural curls pinned back at the sides and loose at the toothed crown, and she was laughing at something the elderly couple at table 4 had just said. Not a polite laugh, not a professional laugh, but the kind that started from somewhere real and came out before she could stop it. That sound crossed the entire restaurant and landed somewhere in Marco's chest. He hadn't felt that in years. Isabella noticed his eyes move. She stopped talking. That, itself, was extraordinary. Isabella Rossi did not stop mid-sentence for anyone alive. She followed his gaze to the waitress, and when she looked back at her son, something cold settled behind her eyes. "Marco," she said. He didn't answer. He was watching Chiara crouch down to show the elderly woman something on the dessert menu, pointing at each item with genuine enthusiasm. Her whole face animated like nothing in the room mattered, except making that woman's afternoon better. There was no performance in it, no calculation, just someone who actually cared about a stranger's happiness over a dessert menu. Marco couldn't remember the last time he'd been in a room with something that uncalculated. His world was made entirely of calculation. Every meeting, every loyalty, every word spoken or withheld. All of it measured, weighed, positioned. He ran the Rossi Group's private security division from a glass office in downtown Milan. And if you knew what the Rossi Group's private security division actually did, you would understand why a man like Marco spent most of his life surrounded by people who chose their words the way others chose weapons. And then there was this woman, Chiara, crouching beside a stranger's table, completely unaware that the most dangerous man in the restaurant was watching her with something close to wonder. Isabella set her fork down with a sound like a gavel. "You are embarrassing this family by breathing in her direction," she said. Marco finally looked at his mother. She was immaculate, as always. Silk, blouse, pearls, the particular kind of posture that said she had never once in her life slouched under pressure. She was also wrong, which was something Marco had never said aloud, because saying it aloud to Isabella Rossi was like dropping a match in a room full of gasoline. But he was 32 years old, and he had been swallowing that word for a decade. And today, in a dark marble restaurant in Rome, watching a waitress laugh like the world was allowed to be good, something in him stopped swallowing. "I hear you," he said quietly. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward table 4, not away from his mother, toward Chiara, and he didn't look back. What happened next? Nobody in that restaurant was prepared for it. Most men who walked towards Chiara Cole with that look on their face wanted something she wasn't selling. She had worked at Sable for 2 years, and she had learned to read that approach. The slow entitlement of it, the sour assumption embedded in the posture. So when the man in the charcoal suit stopped beside table 4 and waited for her to finish speaking to the Morettis, she already had her professional wall up. clean and quiet and impenetrable. But he waited. That was the first thing. He didn't interrupt, didn't clear his throat, didn't tap his watch. He just stood there with his hands in his pockets, patient, in a way that felt almost careful, and waited until she'd finished explaining that the limoncello cake was made fresh every morning, and that, yes, Signora Moretti, it absolutely paired with the herbal tea if her back was bothering her. Only then did he speak. "How do you know all that?" he said. Chiara turned. Up, close. He was younger than she'd registered from across the room, maybe early 30s, with the kind of stillness that usually meant either profound, calm, or contained danger. The suit was understated, expensive, the kind that didn't announce itself. His eyes were the problem. Direct, genuinely curious. Not performing curiosity, actually asking. She kept her expression level. "Know all." "What, sir?" "Which tea pairs with which dessert for a woman whose back hurts," he said. Chiara studied him for 1 second, because she told me her back has been bothering her since Tuesday, and nobody wants to feel worse at dessert than they did at the start of the meal. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "That's the most human thing I've heard all month." She almost smiled. Almost. "I should get back to my section," she said. He nodded. "Of course. And then, your name is Chiara?" She glanced at her name tag. "It is." "My name is Marco," he said, and he walked back to his table without asking her anything else. That was the second thing. He didn't push. She watched him sit back down, across from the woman who looked like she'd been carved from expensive disapproval, and she watched him pick up his water glass with the same calm he'd had walking toward her. And she thought for one passing second that was strange. Good strange. The kind that made you glance back twice. She didn't let herself glance back twice. She had a policy about Sable's clientele. She had a policy about men in general. Truth be told, constructed over 26 years of watching, people show you exactly who they were if you paid attention. Her mother, Sophia Cole, had raised her in Sicily with 3 rules. Work hard, watch closely, and never let a pretty situation blind you to an ugly truth underneath. Chiara had honored all 3, but Marco came back on Thursday. He sat at the bar this time, not a table, and he ordered coffee and read documents for 2 hours. And when Chiara passed him during her section rounds, he said without looking up, I've been thinking about what you said." She paused. "I say a lot of things. About the tea in the back," he said. "About not wanting people to feel worse at the pencher, and then at the beginning." He looked up then. "Is that something you believe? Applies to everything, or just dessert?" It was such a strange question, precise, and odd and completely sincere. Chiara set down the tray she was carrying on the bar edge, and considered him the way she considered most things. "Honestly, everything," she said. "What's the point of an interaction if the person leaves, and it's smaller than they arrived?" Marco was quiet for a moment. Then, "I run a company where most interactions are specifically designed to make people leave, smaller than they arrived." "Then, you already know it's wrong," Chiara said, and she picked up her tray and walked away. She heard him exhale behind her. Not frustrated, something else. Like a man who'd just been handed a word he'd been looking for and hadn't expected it to arrive from that direction. She didn't let herself think about it for the rest of the shift. But at midnight, locking her locker in the back, she thought about it for exactly 45 seconds before shutting it down. She went home to her apartment in Trastevere, Rome, to her roommate, Elena, who was still awake and immediately read her face like a book. "What happened?" Elena said. "Nothing," Chiara said. Elena looked at her. Chiara poured a glass of water. "There was a man," she said. Elena sat up straighter. Chiara shook her head before she could speak. "It's nothing." He asked a question. It was a good question, that's all. But Elena had known Chiara for 4 years, and she knew that Chiara didn't call questions good. She called them useful or irrelevant. Good meant something else entirely, and neither of them said that out loud. But it was there sitting in the kitchen between them, something with weight. Marco came back on Saturday, and this time he brought a question she didn't have an easy answer for. He asked her what she was building, not what she did, not where she was from, not the standard archaeology of small talk that people used to fill space without actually learning anything. He waited until the Saturday dinner rush had thinned, and Chiara was wiping down the service bar, and he sat 3 stools away and said, "You talk about people leaving better than they arrived. So what are you building that does that at scale?" Chiara stopped wiping. She turned slowly. He was watching her with that same directness, completely unguarded, like the question was the most natural thing in the world, and he simply wanted the answer. "This is my 3rd time seeing you," she said. "That's correct," Marco said. "You're answering a question with a fact. I'm noting that you noticed," he said. She put the cloth down. She crossed her arms. "I'm building a community bakery in a neighborhood in northeast Rome that lost its last grocery store 4 years ago, where kids walk 2 miles for food and elderly residents don't walk at all. I want a space that feeds people and teaches people and makes them feel like the neighborhood hasn't forgotten them. It's going to take 3 more years of saving to start, but I will start it." The room was quiet except for the low jazz Sable played between service hours. Marco sat very still. Then he said, "What's stopping you right now besides money?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Chiara felt the ripple of it because nobody had asked that before. People asked how much she needed. How far along was her plan? Wasn't it risky? Didn't she have student loans? All questions that centered the obstacle. Marco had stepped around the obstacle entirely and asked what else was in the way. She answered, honestly before she decided to. "Fear," she said, "that I'll build it and it won't be enough. That the neighborhood will need more than a bakery can give. That I'll pour everything I have into it and it still won't matter." She stopped herself. She hadn't meant to say all of that. Marco nodded slowly. "That's not fear of failure," he said. "That's the fear of someone who cares too much to risk disappointing the people they love." Chiara looked at him. Something in her chest did something inconvenient. She picked up the cloth again. "You should go," she said quietly. He stood before he left. He set a business card on the bar, not pushed toward her, just placed like an option she could ignore. "I'm not trying to buy your dream," he said. "I'm just saying I know people who've built things in neighborhoods that needed them. If you ever want to talk about it, not about us, just about the bakery, I'm available." He left. Chiara stared at the card for a long time before she put it in her apron pocket. She told herself it was for practical reasons. She almost believed it. What she didn't know was that 40 blocks away in a Via Veneto hotel suite, Isabella Rossi was on to the phone with her attorney asking very specific questions about a waitress named Chiara Cole. Isabella had not gotten to where she was by ignoring threats, and she had spent 58 years learning to recognize exactly when something was a threat before it knew it was one. She hung up the phone and poured tea and sat by the window looking out at Rome's lit skyline and thought about her son's face when he'd looked at that woman across the restaurant. She'd seen that look once before, 29 years ago, in a mirror looking at a man her own parents had declared unsuitable. She pressed her lips together and called her son. He answered on the second ring. "We need to meet," she said. Marco's voice was even. "I'm listening." "That's not what I said," Isabella said. "I said we need to meet. There's a difference." "Yes," Marco said. "There is." He said it like he was giving her a lesson, like something had shifted in him that she hadn't been paying close enough attention to catch. She ended the call. She sat back, and for the first time in a very long time, Isabella Rossi felt something she almost couldn't name. It felt like the beginning of losing. But what happened next? She hadn't accounted for it all. The meeting happened in Tuscany. Isabella had a house there, not a vacation home, a statement. 12 rooms, original woodwork, the Branchin kind of property that communicated permanence across generations. Marco drove up, on a Sunday, and found his Aunt Sophia already there, which meant this wasn't a conversation. Highway, she answered on the fourth ring. Chiara, he said, we need to tell you something. She was quiet for a moment. Then, is it going to make my night harder? Yes, he said. Probably. She took a breath. Okay, she said. Tell me. And what she said after he told her, he hadn't seen coming, at all. He told her everything. He told her about the meeting in Tuscany, about his mother's investigation, about the arranged marriage and the board threat and the 40 years of alliance architecture that his one decision to cross a restaurant had placed under pressure. He told her in the car on the highway, driving back to Rome with the city lights coming into view like a slow tide. And he told her without softening any of it because she had never once struck him as someone who needed a softer version of the truth. She listened without interrupting. That itself undid him a little. When he finished, there was silence, not empty, but thinking. And then Chiara said, "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know what you're adjacent to," he said. "And I'm not going to watch you get blindsided by something I could have warned you about." Another silence. Then, "How long have you been running the security division?" 11 years, he said. She said, "And in 11 years, has your judgment cost the company in any significant way?" "No," he said. She said, "Then your mother isn't actually worried about your judgment. She's worried about what your banter judgment reveals about what you want. And what you want doesn't fit her plan." He merged onto the highway. "Nothing," Chiara continued. "That's not a company problem, Marco. That's a mother who's built a structure around keeping her son close to her vision of his life. And I understand that. I actually do. But you call me at midnight to tell me the truth, and that tells me more about you than anything else you could have done." He exhaled. "You're not angry," he said. She said, "I'm a lot of things. Angry isn't the main one." "What is?" he said. She was quiet for a moment, careful. She said, "I'm careful because I grew up watching people I loved give themselves to things that looked like love and turned out to be convenience. And I decided a long time ago that I would rather be alone and clear than confused and chosen for the wrong reasons. So, I need you to tell me something honestly." "Yes," he said. "Why did you walk across that restaurant?" She said, straight, no beautiful version. "Why?" The highway opened up ahead of him. He didn't pause. "Because you were the only real thing in the room," he said. "And I hadn't been in a room with something real in so long, I almost didn't recognize it." The line was quiet. Then Chiara said, "That's either the most honest thing a man has ever said to me, or the most well-constructed." He almost laughed. "I don't construct things for people I actually respect," he said. She took a breath. "I'll meet you," she said. "Not tonight. Tomorrow. There's a community center on Via del Corso that I volunteer at Tuesday mornings. Come there. Don't wear the suit." He looked down at himself. "I'm in the suit." "I know," she said. "Tomorrow. Don't." She hung up. He was smiling. He was also aware that this was the most dangerous thing he had ever done, and he had once negotiated with 2 rival networks in a parking structure in Naples with no backup. But this felt like something with stakes he actually cared about losing. He arrived home to 17 messages from his Aunt Sophia, 2 from Riccardo the attorney, and 1 from his younger sister Luna, that said simply, "I heard. Come by tomorrow before your meeting. Don't be stubborn." He texted Luna back, "I'm not being stubborn. I'm being honest." She replied in under 10 seconds. In this family, those are the same thing. He sat at his kitchen window in his empty Aventine Hill apartment and thought about a woman who told him fear was standing between her and everything she was in building, and who had listened to the most complicated version of his life without flinching and simply asked, "Why did you walk across the room?" He thought, "Because you laugh like the world was allowed to be good and I needed to." I know if that was real. He thought, because I have spent 11 years being effective, and exactly 0 of those years being alive, and the sound of you across a restaurant was the first proof I'd had in a decade that alive was still an option. He thought all of it. He didn't say any of it yet, but tomorrow was Tuesday, and Kiara Cole had told him to come find her, so he would. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that Isabella had not stopped at an investigation. She was already in Rome, and she was about to do something that would force every hidden thing in this story into the open. Isabella arrived at the community center first. That was the thing about Marco's mother. She never arrived second. She was seated in a chair near the entrance when Kiara came in at 7:45 to set up the Tuesday morning nutrition workshop she ran for neighborhood seniors. Kiara saw her and stopped walking. She knew who this was. Without introduction, the pearls were the same. The posture was the same. The particular stillness of a woman who had decided something. Miss Cole, Isabella said, please sit. Kiara considered the door. Then she sat down her bag and sat. She folded her hands. She waited. Isabella studied her for a moment. The kind of study that cataloged and assessed and filed. And then she said, you are not what I expected. Kiara said, I imagine not. What did you expect? Someone performing, Isabella said. Someone trying to seem worthy of a room they wanted to enter. You're not trying to enter any room at all, are you? I've got a room, Kiara said. I'm trying to build one. Isabella was quiet. Then she said, my son is not a casual person. When he decides on something, he does not undecide, and he has decided on you with a speed and certainty that tells me this is not infatuation, which means if I remove you from his life, through pressure or consequence, I don't save him. I just take something real from him and leave him with the absence of it. Kiara was very still. She said, you came here to tell me to stay away. I came here because my daughter Luna told me something yesterday that I have been unable to stop thinking about. What did she say? Kiara asked. Isabella looked at her hands. She said, Mom, you haven't listened to someone tell you the truth in 20 years. And Marco is telling you the truth about what he needs. And you keep responding with architecture instead of hearing him. I came here because I wanted to see the thing he was telling the truth about. She looked at Kiara directly. So, tell me about the bakery. Kiara blinked. Of all the things she had prepared for, this was not one of them. She said, excuse me, the bakery. The bakery, Isabella repeated. My son said, you're building something. Tell me about it. And so in a community center in northeast Rome at 7:50 inches the morning with seniors slowly filling the room behind them, Kiara told Isabella Rossi about the bakery, about the neighborhood that lost its grocery store, about the children walking 2 miles for food, and the elderly who didn't walk at all, about the classes she wanted to teach, nutrition, cooking, basic food science for kids who never held a whisk, about the wall she wanted to put up with photographs of every family who'd ever called this neighborhood home, about the smell she wanted the place to have, brown butter and cinnamon, and the specific warmth of a room where someone is always expected. She talked for 12 minutes, straight. Isabella did not interrupt once. When Kiara finished, the room was quiet between them. Then Isabella said, my mother had a kitchen like that in Sicily. Before the war moved everything, people came not just for food. They came because she made them feel that the neighborhood remembered them. Kiara said softly, that's exactly it. That's the whole thing. Isabella looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once, small, precise, like a decision being filed. When Marco arrived at 8:15 and saw his mother sitting beside Kiara with a cup of tea in her hands and the blueprint sketches from Kiara's bag spread across the table between them, he stood in the doorway for a full 10 seconds and could not move. His mother looked up. You're late, she said. He said, you're here. Yes, Isabella said, and she said it in the particular tone of a woman who had just rearranged something inside herself and intended to keep it that way. He sat beside Chiara. Their hands found each other under the table without either of them deciding to. Isabella saw it. She looked away and said nothing. That nothing was everything. The board threat was withdrawn 6 days later. The arranged marriage dissolved quietly through channels. Isabella never publicly explained either decision, but Luna told Marco what their mother had said, privately to Riccardo, the attorney, when she called him to reverse the 7 instructions. I was trying to protect my son from repeating my mistakes, but I made the mistake of assuming my fear and his future were the same shape. They aren't. Let him build what he's building. 3 months later, a small commercial space in northeast Rome opened its doors under a hand-painted sign that read, Chiara's Community Bakery and Learning Kitchen. The line stretched around the Proven corner. By month 2, the nutrition workshop had 40 regular seniors. By month 3, 14 children were enrolled in the Saturday baking class, and one of them had already told Chiara she wanted to be a chef. Marco came on opening day in a regular shirt, no suit, and stood in the back where Chiara could see him, but the crowd couldn't, and watched her move through that room like she'd been built for it, which she had. He thought about a restaurant in Rome, 40 blocks away, where a woman had laughed for a stranger over a dessert menu. He thought about his mother in her museum, quiet house, and all the things she'd chosen and all the things she'd lost and how she'd handed him a warning he'd been wise enough to. Here is a map. He thought about Chiara saying, what's the point of an interaction if the person leaves it smaller than they arrived? He hadn't left a single room smaller since he'd walked toward her. At the end of opening day, when the last customer left and Chiara locked the door and turned around and found Marco still there, she said, You stayed. He said, I said I would. She walked toward him across the empty bakery, flour on her hands, exhaustion in her shoulders, the specific light of a woman who had built a real thing and was standing inside it for the first time. He held out his arms. She walked into them, and somewhere in Tuscany, Isabella Rossi sat in her 1-2-room house and opened a letter she'd written to herself 29 years ago and never sent. She read it once. Then she picked up the phone and called Luna. I want to have dinner, she said. All of us, the real kind. Not the performance, just dinner. Luna was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll tell Marco. Isabella said, Tell Chiara to tell her to bring the recipe. She hung up. And that was how a family that had spent 40 years building walls decided slowly, imperfectly, one meal at a time, to build something else instead.